Sometimes we use historical evidence. We talk about facts of that bigger, grander culture that goes beyond us. It might be a time to kind of throw in information that is relevant. For example, if someone's talking about divorce, it might be a good idea. If someone's talking about divorce, it might be a good idea to kind of bring up divorce rates within the past 10 years in America to make people understand that, hey, maybe what they're going through also is a reflection of the dominant culture, and give them a little bit broader understanding of their own story in context of today's world and what's actually happening. We talk about supporting this news story, and we're going to talk about this news story a little bit later. But it's important to support it and to make some validity and truth to the news story, so that they can go about living their lives according to this news story, with a sense that, hey, this is the new truth, and I can put faith in that this is who I am now. As opposed to who I was when I told the original story. We are moving towards externalizing the problem. Whatever problem we're presenting, whatever problem the client is coming to the table with, we're trying to get them to detach from the problem and understand it in a different sense, obviously via storytelling. Oftentimes we map the effects of the problem. We talk about how the problem is affecting our lives. We also would, again, listen for strengths all along the way, even throughout the problem, so that we can use those strengths as fuel and as a foundation of telling the news story. And we're going to build this news story based on competence. We're going to have a better understanding of who we are. We're going to have a better understanding of the bigger culture that's affecting this story, so that we can feel confident that this news story holds true. And we're going to be able to live our lives accordingly with that news story. There's no formulas, there's no recipes, there's no techniques. This narrative therapy is more of a counseling style or a counseling approach. It's just kind of a mind state. Obviously, we are using storytelling. I guess that could be considered a technique, but there's no trickery. There's no magic questions. There's no talk to the chair or role-playing kind of exercises. This is kind of straightforward. We're going to be telling stories and retelling stories until we find a new truth that works for our client. We're going to ask lots of questions, and they're going to be circular questions, questions that kind of explore the topics that they're telling, and perhaps have them look at these stories that they're telling in new ways. Maybe perhaps they forgot certain qualities or certain aspects or certain storylines. Maybe they forgot how much the dominant culture is imposing itself upon ourselves. Maybe they're just going to look at things from a new perspective based on how we kind of throw questions at them and get them thinking about their own story. And we are going to have them retell the story with the added strengths that we have found along the way. The things that they kind of brush over, the things that they don't really mention. We're going to kind of have them highlight those things, and we're going to have them be major focal points in the news story. So even if it's a bad story, even if it's an awful story about maybe perhaps a crime that was committed against you, maybe there are certain strengths in there that were overlooked. The strength to get up and carry on the next day, the strength to file a police report, the strength to even come in and talk about it. These things might not be part of that original painful story. We need to kind of highlight them to bring some positivity to some of these problems. All of this is meant to empower the individual. It's meant to boost them up, give them a bigger sense of self-esteem, if you will, so that they can kind of tackle the world in a new way. Again, we're trying to externalize these problems. We're trying to separate the person from the problem. And we're looking at a map of influence. We're trying to find less blame and less shame. If we have a better understanding of the story, we might find that, hey, you know what, maybe it wasn't just the individual that brought upon some of these things. Maybe it was that dominating culture, or maybe it was your mother, or your father, or your brother, or your sister, it doesn't matter. Maybe there were other factors, socioeconomic factors. Maybe this bad story that we're telling right now wouldn't have happened had America's economy had been a little bit better, for example. You never know, but we try to, again, in the process of externalizing, we really try to see where the influence of this story is coming from, and we try to take it away from the individual and not kind of put so much pressure on them as kind of like being the sole individual to kind of create this problem. Maybe there is some other sort of influence. So we try to map that influence. We try to see what were the other factors. We try to find unique outcomes where we kind of say, okay, you're telling me this story, but can you think of a time when you weren't this, or when you didn't do this, or when something counteracts with this? A time perhaps when you were successful. So this way you're kind of, you're validating their story, but at the same time you're kind of asking them to broaden their view and just and think, instead of saying always and kind of giving some absolutes to things, have them think about exceptions. We need to have them construct new stories, to re-author. They have a choice. People can live by the old story, or they can live by a new one. But if they're living by the old story, then they're not really changing. It's not really the purpose of why they've come to you as a counselor. If it works for them, great. But if this is like a problem, if their story and the way that they retell it, and the way that they see themselves as an individual is not working for them, they'll probably want to tell a new story. And that's basically what we're trying to do. We're trying to have them look at their lives from a different way. And even more so, when they're asked by anybody or who they choose to tell their life story, it's a different story from when they came into your office originally. And hopefully it's one that's, let's be honest, a better or a prettier story. Oftentimes, being narrative in itself, we focus on language, we focus on the craft of a story. So it wouldn't be uncommon for the therapist to write a letter to the client and actually kind of say, maybe talk about a little bit of the reflection of the story, maybe kind of, I'm not saying necessarily self-disclose, but maybe kind of continue to push a person into thinking in new ways, so that when it comes time for them to tell the story, there's so much focus on language and how we put these stories together. Maybe our clients can learn from us in the way that we tell stories. So it wouldn't be uncommon to write your client a letter so they can kind of see how a story can be told. People don't necessarily know that stories can be complex and complicated and have all sorts of different aspects of it. So we're kind of trying to teach them via example that there's a new way to live your life via stories. Obviously, we're trying to include evidence, and we're trying to kind of make a smooth transition between the old story and the new story. Oftentimes that can even start with, I used to think blah, 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 but now I think blah, blah, blah. Or, when I originally started telling my life story, I would tell you about blah, 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 but now I'm going to begin with blah, 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 blah. The whole Charles Dickens book where it begins with, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. That's that broader cultural thing that we're talking about. It goes on to tell these individual stories about people's lives, but there's also room for areas to kind of add things that give the story a little bit more perspective. So once again, narrative therapy, a postmodern therapy, really used to kind of tell stories. and to retell stories, and continuously go in circles of retelling story. Tell me the story. We're going to note all these positives. We're going to note all these cultural impacts, the map of influence, and then I want you to retell the story again. And then when you retell the story again, we're going to find all those positives again. We're going to find those map of influence, and then we're going to retell the story again. And then we're going to retell the story again and again and again and again until the story works. Until it's, wow, I came in thinking that my life story was this way, and now it's this. And now this new story works for me better. That's basically the approach of narrative therapy. Obviously, if you're interested more in it, you can kind of read up on it. But try it sometime when you're working with a client. Have them tell a life story, and then note some things, and have them retell the story, and kind of give it a shot and see what that feels like for you, and see if that's a practice that you would like to kind of use in your therapy, or if it's not really for you, then you can move on and use another theory. Sticking with the postmodern approach of things, I want to talk about a very popular postmodern therapy these days, which is solution-focused brief therapy. I'll repeat that: solution-focused brief therapy. And it was brought about by Insoo Camberge and Steve DeShazier. And it's what it sounds like. It's solution-focused, and it's brief. And what we're trying to do, and this is kind of one of the key points, is we're shifting the focus from problem solving to focusing on solutions. I'm a school counselor. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm in my office right now. And so many students that come through this door, I use this approach with. The truth of the matter is, I don't have the hours to do cognitive behavioral therapy. I don't have the hours and days and years to do psychoanalytic therapy. Oftentimes, some of the problems need to be solved quickly, briefly. And some of those times, I just simply don't have the time, or maybe the time isn't even necessary for the clients to get into the whole problem. Why it happened, how it happened, giving me the details. He said this, and she said this, and he said this, and she said this. But you know what? We could do that all day and talk about, no, you said this, no, back and forth. But oftentimes what I'll do is I'll give my clients, my students, a little bit of time to talk about those things. But then I very quickly start to focus on the solutions. And I ask them, okay, what do you need from this situation? Okay, this is what it is. Now, what do you need from this situation? And it's a way to kind of simply say, if we're going to go forward, what needs to be done? You know what? We can go backwards and we can retell the story of all those problems and why we got to this place. But you know what? I'm not concerned about that. I'm concerned about solutions. I'm concerned about fixing the problem so that you can get back to class and learn your lesson or whatever else it is that you're here for. I use the example of being a school counselor. It can be used on any aspect of life, solution-focused brief therapy. If you're basically trying to cause a conflict and, solve a conflict and get back to things very quickly. You can see parents do this all the time when they have children and multiple children. There will be some sort of fight or argument or something, some sort of little issue between two kids, and then a mother or father will swoop in and they'll solve the thing very quickly by perhaps splitting the candy bar and giving the two kids each a piece. That's solution focused. We don't need to get into the fact of like all the hurt and whatever about one person wanting the candy bar and the other person not having the candy bar. No, just solution focused. Break it in half. Let's go on. Let's move on with our lives.